I'm pleased to welcome back to the podcast my guest today. We were both first-time mayors for our respective townships. For the two of us, it was our first run at elected office. And for the two of us, though achieved through different paths, we're also members of the One-Term Mayors Club. We became good friends during our time together on regional council, at the Grand River Conservation Authority, and through our regular meetings of the Township Mayors Caucus, which continued on after pre-COVID. During his term as mayor, he demonstrated himself to be a very activist mayor, very involved in the community, and in dealing with a large number of issues. When he was last here, we talked casinos, and today I look forward to our discussion about gravel pits. He's an old gray mayor, my friend, Todd Cowan.
Thanks, Rob.
Todd, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
So give us an update on what you've been doing since we were last together. I know you've got the paper going on. What's happening?
Yeah, I'm still old and I'm still gray. So I started the Waterloo Region Rural Post a couple years ago, but now we're kind of full out. We stopped COVID time, but we started publishing again in August. And we basically, the whole idea behind it is just to bring together the rural communities, Woolwich, Wellesley, Wilmot, North Dumfries, as a whole. And I think once COVID passes, it'll be even more fun because, as you know, Ayr has a new hockey team.
That's right.
So they're now going to be head to head with Elmira. So I think, and I think it's good to have something that kind of brings us all together in a positive way. So, yeah. And it's been, it's not been easy, of course, but we're getting through. And
well, yeah, I mean, local papers, local news. First of all, it's tough just to maintain if you're running that industry, right, as you well know now. And I can appreciate, yep, as a businessman running my law practice, I can understand, the finances and everything else that has to go into running a business. And I can imagine, with advertising revenues being hit generally, you're not a subscription newspaper, no, so you're not getting fees that way, that it can be difficult. So I guess it's, in one sense, it's good that the federal government, and I don't know if it's a benefit at all to you, but they've shown some support for local papers.
Right. They have some. We haven't taken advantage of it. We didn't really want to, most of it was more of a loan type stuff. And we thought, we don't want to take any debt on, or any more debt, I should say. So, sure. But yeah, we have a readership of over 70,000 now. Yeah. 4 townships, and then we go a little into Wellington and up into Perth. So, and yeah, we try to keep it positive and informative, and I think that's the big thing.
Well, it's kind of interesting. So you and I probably have similar experiences because, during your time, and actually we'll just touch on this for a second before we get into the gravel stuff. But since we're talking about local papers, so mm-hmm, during our time as mayor, we certainly would have had interactions with our local papers. Yours would have been the Woolwich Observer, mine, yep, the Ayr News. And even though sometimes I'm sure the perception was that there was headbutting there, I mean, I do appreciate the inquisitiveness that they demonstrated when mm-hmm, they were looking into issues.
Yep. Yeah.
But at the same time, it was a great forum and to get your message out to your local constituents.
Right. Oh, most definitely. And I think when you look at the newspaper industry, even like in the region of Waterloo, the dailies, it's tough with the Waterloo Record because you've got Facebook and you've got Instagram and you got Twitter and you got all these other news things competing. Where, somebody told me a while ago when we started the paper, just keep it local. It's a local paper, and I just find paper, like a local community paper, be it in Ayr or in New Hamburg or wherever, it really brings the community together because we highlight, especially our paper, we're highlighting, business people or citizens, and here's what they're doing over here, and yeah, just trying to give them some press and bring it together. So,
and I saw Wilmot just had a new local paper.
Yeah, the Wilmot Post. Yeah, out of Tavistock.
Is the Hamburg Independent still going, or did something happen there?
No, it's still kind of chugging along too. And that's a Metro Land paper, so yeah,
okay. So the local news might not have the stature or priority that one would hope in right, local paper.
Well, and that's it too. It's kind of tough these days, and but we're trying to focus on all of the townships and kind of especially now comes that time of the year when we all got excited about tax time when we go through the budgeting. So we're hoping that we'll have a good lively debate in a sense, but we can compare, because you used to tout how North Dumfries had the lowest taxes in the region, and I think they still do.
I said that was a problem. I wasn't.
I know that's
I
raising taxes.
I had the highest tax increases to
Right.
get it back up. It was way too low.
Oh,
You
I
couldn't
know
do
it
what
was.
people wanted to do.
But when you look at the record, gives a little bit of press for when it comes budget season. But we want to kind of highlight it a little bit more and kind of look at it
Okay.
and from Woolwich to Wellesley, Wilmot, and
Yeah, you're gonna go more in depth on
yep,
local issues. That's
right,
your plan.
and compare because that's the thing. If you just have, say, the Air News
Okay.
cover North Dumfries, they just look at Air, North Dumfries, where we're going to look at all 4 townships,
Yeah.
and services and stuff like that. Not
Yeah.
to, just so people get a better handle on what they're getting.
Yeah, well, in our 2-tier structure, we talk about how important it is to maintain. You and I appreciate the 2-tier. My friend Alex may not as much, but
Yes.
but having these local papers helps maintain that voice, that character
Right.
that we say is best able to be preserved by
Yep.
having our local townships, and it's worth the price. I mean, people always say, well, it's 56 politicians or whatever. Politicians, especially counselors, these are part-time counselors making $25,000 to $30,000 a year. That's not the big cost that's going
Right.
on.
Yep. Yep.
To have that local flavor. So, okay,
Exactly.
So for you, it's interesting because you and I were talking about this earlier. When I was running for mayor, I don't think gravel pits were really much on the scene. I remember campaigning in one area of the township. It was called Shep subdivision. And there had been an ongoing issue for a couple of years where there was 1 or 2 families in that neighborhood that were upset about a gravel pit somewhere in that area.
Yep.
And we're trying to galvanize the support of the community through, let's say, fundraising to hire people to assist in it. And it kind of waned after a while. And so that was really didn't have much of an issue there. But during your time, when you were running the first time for mayor,
right.
the gravel pit was a bigger issue, wasn't it?
Most definitely, especially in Westmount Rose, Conestoga, in that kind of the west side of the township, because that was something that we had we probably had about 20 active pits, not huge pits like North Dumfries, but it was the big issue was location. So when I was campaigning door to door in, say, Westmount Rose, where the Kissing Bridge is, every single door that I spoke with, was the question: what are you doing on gravel pits? Where do you stand on gravel pits? And then I go to Conestoga, and it's the same thing. Winterbourne, same thing. It was just one of the things that was, they didn't talk about taxes. They didn't talk about, transportation or transit or whatever. It was, what's your stand on gravel pits?
Yeah. So those things that potentially impact people. We'll talk about perception and reality and all of that.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's like when I first started knocking on doors, I always remember the first day I was knocking on doors, and 7 of the 9 homes just talked about cars speeding along the roads in their settlement areas. And that was, see 80 kilometers, but they're going 100, and one person had 7 cats killed in a year because of cars. And you hear those, and it really kind of stunned me. Nobody talked about property tax rates or anything like that.
No.
It was just those sort of grassroots type of issues that people deal with. So one of the pits I had down here is the Huntsberger pit. Is that how it was called, or it was called something else?
It was Hunsberger's owned it. It was the 100 Developments, but yeah, Bob Hunsberger, he owned about 150-ish acres out there in Conestoga on Hunsberger Road, and they've been there for many, many years.
Right.
So when I campaigned, it was because I was hearing it, but I had already kind of put in my platform that we need gravel, right? Doesn't matter we're in a society, we're in a community, especially here, we're growing, we need infrastructure, we need gravel. So I wasn't against gravel, but I was against having the pits in certain areas.
Right. We'll talk about that in a sec. But what I wanted
Okay.
to say, first of all, on the need gravel, just as an aside,
Okay.
one thing I learned was gravel was even used in toothpaste.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Like it was like, I guess I'll get
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
tar off your the
Exactly.
tar off your teeth or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But when you were campaigning then back in 2010,
Yep.
was the so are we calling it the Huntsberger pit or the Hunter? What are we calling it?
It was a Hunsberger pit, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, so the Huntsberger pit, which is near Conestoga, then I'm gathering from what you're saying.
It's literally in the backyard. So if you go down Gulf
Okay.
Coast Road, it's like literally in the backyard. It's not across the road. It's literally in their backyard.
So the application itself had already been started prior to 2010.
It started in 2009 is when I think they had first filed it. So, after you file your application, there's this period of, the waiting and the
Studies, you want studies done, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because I think as per the municipal act, or I'm not sure which particular act, there's a certain requirement that you have to respond by a certain time period.
Right.
I think it's like 6 months or something like that. But for the most part, the gravel pit companies initiate these applications, but they're not holding you to that time frame. Sometimes these applications can be sitting around for a couple of years before they actually finally get addressed.
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah.
So in your case, then you're knocking on doors in Conestoga. Then what? Like, was your position different than the incumbent, or what?
Well, my position specifically, like I got invited as soon as I started knocking on doors, and I put my little shingle out. Then I was invited to the association. It was like the Conestoga Residents Association or something like that. I think it was Conestoga Winterbourne Residents invited me to their home, and then they had basically everybody there, and they said, okay, here's what we're doing. Where do you stand on this? So I was there. Mayor Strauss, who was my predecessor, was invited, and then Pat McLean was also running for mayor. So Pat and I met with him, but Mayor Strauss didn't meet with him.
Why wouldn't you go out to meet with him?
I don't know. That was his choice. It wasn't really his style of when he led. He was,
Right.
and I was young and fresh and keen, and I wanted to hear everybody's view. And it was before I'd gone there, I'd already had it in my platform that I believe that gravel had a place in our communities, just not right in
I mean,
where they are.
The province mandated a priority on gravel.
Almost definitely, yeah.
Like it was like gold.
Yeah, a little lower in price, but yes, it was like gold because of all the infrastructure, it was definitely there, and I didn't have a problem with that. But then it came back to that was going to be my priority. I made a commitment that said, I will help try to protect the backyards of residents of Conestoga and even in West Mount Rose from the ground.
It's tough to defeat a gravel application.
It is. It comes back to, in my opinion, I think it takes a lot. It takes a lot of money, like a lot of organization from a community group, but also from a townshipping. And I think the biggest thing is if you have a township that is a municipality that is on your side in a sense, or feels kind of the same way about gravel and where they are, it makes it a lot easier because each township, as you know, in North Dumfries, you have an official plan, and I'm sure your official plan or the North Dumfries one is different than the Woolwich one as far as where gravel would be extracted from and where it's not. Yeah. So Woolwich one, especially the Hunsberger pit, it didn't really line up with our official plan of where it was at and just location and the quality of gravel.
Yeah, but you have to have some particular, we'll say, angle or feature that really has to make it stand out, because most people will talk about, for example, it's going to affect air quality, and they talk about the silica dust, or it's going to lower home prices in our area. Or the water table argument, and we'll touch on all those different ones.
Yeah.
I think the biggest one is sort of the heritage aspects, which we'll talk about on the Westmont Roads, which always seem to
Right.
me to be the one, or if you're near an environmentally sensitive area, okay?
Exactly.
Like
Yeah.
the, was it the Moraine or whatever, there was, I forget which one that was in the Toronto area, that,
Oh, Oak Ridges, maybe?
what's
Oak
that?
Ridge, was that the
Yeah,
Oak Ridge?
yeah, the Oak Ridge Moraine
Yep.
area, which
Yep.
was successful in getting stopped. But so now here you are, you're running. I
Right.
mean, I'm sure you didn't do a ton of research on gravel pits. You know,
No, I didn't. But I kind of, and when you're not an incumbent, you don't have the luxury, I guess, of staff that you can go and say,
yeah,
hey, director of planning,
right.
I don't want to say stuff, so.
Yeah, well, I think one benefit you probably did have was because it's a provincial issue,
Mhm.
your background, just touch on it briefly before you got
Right,
in, before you ran for mayor and came to
right, right,
Elmira.
right.
You were working at Queen's Park.
Right. Yeah, I was working in Queens Park, but not in mines.
No,
Uh,
no, but you understand the
I,
politics.
the politics of the whole thing.
So
Yeah.
what was your, I forget if we even touched on that last time we talked.
So I started in Toronto in Queens Park in let me think about this. This would have been 90, 98, 99, working with Dalton McGuinty when he was not a premier. He was just opposition. And then after 2003, I was Liz Sandals' chief of staff from Guelph.
So that
And
brought you to the area, so to
yeah.
speak.
And so basically, I was her chief, but then I was also a policy advisor to a few ministers and stuff like that. So I
You
did,
had an appreciation for what it might take in order to deal with this issue.
right, or red tape. you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
the thing is,
Yeah.
and it was definitely an uphill battle. That was the thing, is when you're facing it. So you're like, as a mayor, here you are, you have it's almost like one of these, OK Corral kind of a thing where that there's going to be a gunfight, because the developer says, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to put forth your application. And when the township is pushing back, then let's run to the OMB. Now that has been changed to the local planning appeal tribunal, the LPAT, same kind of deal. And then the township has to be ready for battle in a
Well,
sense,
this
financially.
is, yeah, this is the big issue. Okay,
Right,
so under the OMB, which is what we were dealing with back in 2010 to
right.
2014, I mean, the general view
Hmm.
was once it's at the OMB, it's out of your hands.
Exactly.
And sometimes the view was that, or the predominant view was that local considerations weren't really being taken into consideration
Right,
uh,
exactly.
at that level. And so the general feeling was, and I guess the appeal to the province was, make some changes so that
Right,
more deference is given to what the local politicians want
right,
to do. And
right.
that's where LPAT came from, wasn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. We'll see after we were finished at the mayor's, the Wynne government did make changes to the OMB that kind of took out the more impassioned arguments around, stop this gravel pit. But then once the Ford government got in, they kind of changed the name, but they changed it back. And I think that was the thing, is we as municipal politicians could say, well, it's a provincial issue. Yes, it is, but you still have, if you champion that issue,
Yeah.
and you have your council endorsing what you're doing, and I think that's the big thing. Because when we were there, it was, it was pretty easy just to throw your hands up and say, sorry, this is like a provincial thing. But because I took the stand, I think that definitely helped the situation, because
Well, yeah, I think we should step back though a second. I mean, first of all, um, a local council is going to be concerned about legal costs for any
yeah,
fight.
most
Okay,
definitely.
and that's
Yep,
understandable. All right,
yep.
because you're talking
Those
hundreds of
lawyers, yeah,
thousands. Yeah, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars
yep,
in any battle, and you're not just going to go willy nilly into a battle because you say I'm standing up for you.
no,
Okay,
I agree.
where's that cliff we're all just going to jump off of?
Yeah, exactly.
So we're gonna talk about Huntsberger because there had to be something there that's
Right,
sort of like that hook that got it done for you guys. All right.
right.
So
I
we'll
think,
talk about that in a sec. We'll talk
and I
about that
think,
in a sec.
so the
But
big thing.
I just want to touch base though on the legal cost issue.
Sure. Okay.
When budgets are made, and we've in various podcasts we talk about budgets and the importance of budgets. When you prepare your budget for the year, not really knowing whether you're going to be into an OMB hearing or not,
Right.
okay, you can't really predict a year out or 2 years out.
Right.
you're not going to put like $200,000-300,000 in a line item that says legal fees for something you're not 100% sure about. Usually it's sort of a stakeholder amount. You throw in 10, 20, 30,000 just to show
Right,
something there,
right,
because you will get some legal advice from time to
right,
time. So in this case,
right.
you're campaigning saying, yeah, we're going to fight this thing. I'm
Yep,
presuming that's what you're saying, correct?
pretty much. Yeah, yep,
Right. But now it's an issue of what's this going to cost?
exactly.
And are we going to win? Everyone asks that. If I'm going to
Right.
spend this kind of money, what's my chances of winning? So
Yep.
talk about that.
All good questions. So at the time when I was there, our director of planning and engineering was Dan Kennelly. And Dan Kennelly came from Caledon before he came to the township of Woolwich.
Oh,
And he had a fair bit of experience in the gravel pit, OMB type thing. So before we got to the budgeting part of it, we had a number of meetings with Mr. Kennelly and said, listen, Dan, looking at our township official plan, the region of Waterloo official plan, and GRC is in there and all these things, and then looking at the merits of a Huntsberger pit with all the other things you said about this, the silicate and the dust and the home.
yeah.
We looked at the whole thing. Do you think we have a good chance of this? And I think the biggest thing that I remember was just the proximity it was to homes. Like, it was literally in the backyard. And that was a huge one. So, the developer on their side said, well, we'll build these big berms and put all these trees and hide it. But
Right.
you know,
Or they'll even give some land to the
right.
homeowners for a buffer.
Exactly. So when we went into it, that was the first thing. Is Dan looked at the whole thing. He looked at the township's official plan, and he'd been there when we got there in 2010. He'd already been with the township a number of years, so he was quite aware of the official plan, and he thought we had a really strong case because of all of those factors. And then at that
Well,
point,
okay, hold on. You're talking about proximity.
that was a big one.
That was a big
Uh,
one.
that was a big one. Like, Dan felt with his experience with the OMB, he felt that was that was definitely one of the big factors, is just how close it was.
Any
Uh,
other factors?
uh, well, all of the other ones played a role, but not as big as the proximity one. Because
So the proximity then was going to be a quality of life or enjoyment of life
yeah,
argument for
it was that.
the
It was
neighbors.
all the other things too. Because if you have a gravel pit, like literally at the back fence of your property, which you've got the
Yeah,
dust.
but no gravel pit, but Todd, no gravel pit operator's they're going to give you a buffer.
No, there was a little buffer in there, but again, it was right there. It was the home prices. Like, even the home prices was a huge issue there.
So that argument on the house prices declining was something that the OMB bought into?
I think it was everything. It wasn't just one thing, and I think that
No,
was
it's a
Dan.
multiple of factors, sure.
I think that was kind of our whole strategy at the time. Is it was kind of not just that one issue. It was going to be the everything all built up. But the back, like I said, that back, when we looked at when Dan looked at our official plan at the township, and he looked at basically all of our experts, from the groundwater to the dust to the traffic to this, he felt we had a good case.
So
And
on groundwater, do you recall what the issue would have been with the groundwater? Was there a concern
it
like from
was
the
always,
region?
I don't remember specifically on the Hansberger one where the groundwater was an issue, like specifically, but they always, it didn't, they always felt that any gravel mining, I guess, is going to affect the groundwater to a certain degree. So that was a factor, but that wasn't kind of the main factor, because they weren't going below the water table.
Yeah, because I mean, you're going to want to know before you jump into this what the potential likelihood of success is going to be, because
Yeah,
you're going to be investing. I mean,
most definitely.
what did you estimate ahead of time what you were going to invest in this?
Well, we actually, and it's funny you said earlier, and you're not going to put a budget line. I think we did have a budget line in our budget that year for legal fees, and I believe it was around the $400,000 mark.
Because you knew you were going into this.
We had a pretty good, yeah, we knew we were going to go into this, and we wanted to make sure, because we got the best lawyers, Aird and Bayless, out of Toronto, that had a great track record on on these kind of deals, that did a lot of OMB hearings that were very meticulous in everything. They felt very strongly that we had a good case. So we had, and then you have to go your own experts. Then the town or the residents get their own experts.
Yeah, well, hold on. We don't want to jump into this. Hold on. You're just kind of going
Okay.
yada, yada, yada on too much
Got
stuff
it.
here. But so you had to hire lawyers. Did you
Yep.
hire experts outside of your own planner?
Oh, most definitely. Because you had to have and they all have to do this. So you have to have your own high road G person or company. You had to have your own engineers, sound engineers. So each area had to have your own experts, and they
Now,
couldn't be with anybody else.
your planner would have done a report.
Hmm.
And do you recall whether the planner was in support of or opposed to the application?
Um, I think when you first once those applications are made, when they first come to council, I think that they're very neutral. I don't think that they are. They don't really. I don't think they
Or
show
staff report?
like the staff reports are not. They're not slighted one way or the other. I think it's just more or less kind of laying it out.
Yeah, okay, so there was never a point where your staff made a recommendation?
Mm, I don't believe so. Yeah, I don't think they would have. I think they got to stay pretty
Sometimes,
neutral on stuff like that.
sometimes you can run into those situations where staff makes a recommendation that's in support of, let's say, a developer's
Right.
application,
Right.
but then council votes against it. Now council's in the
Yeah.
situation of having to find an expert to
Right.
support their position that's
Support
going to
their
be contrary to
Right.
their own person.
Right.
So,
I think early days in the application process, though, I think council and staff are pretty um, cautious not to take a position. It's kind of like as it evolves, then it goes into that. And
was the township already committed to fighting this pit prior to
no, no,
2010?
no, 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 no. I don't think that this township or the township staff never really took a position until it got to that stage where we had to go through the public hearings. Um, and
So
then
now
I think,
you're one person,
right.
as a candidate for mayor who's making
Yep.
a commitment to these people.
Yep.
But in order to get approval to go ahead, you need the approval of the rest of or the majority of your
Majority.
members of council.
Right. Right.
And how was that?
Well, it was good. Well, Bonnie Bryan, who is a counselor out she was from Maryhill. She, of course, was also quite vocal in fighting the gravel pits out in that area. And she was supportive, and I do believe it was pretty much unanimous. I'd have to look. Because I think the argument again was how it was going to affect the lives or the livelihood of people out there.
Right. Okay, so now
Yeah.
let's go back. So you get elected, you're looking into this, your planner's telling you there's a good shot at it.
Right.
You've hired legal counsel to take a look at it, and they think there's something here for you as well.
Yep. Yep.
But let's go back to the homeowners association. Okay, the original people you met during the election.
Yep.
Was this organization formed specifically for opposition to the gravel pit, or was it something in existence
No,
already?
no. It was specifically to fight the gravel pits, to stop the gravel pits.
And what was this organization's involvement as you were doing your thing? They're on a track doing what was their thing that they were doing?
It's basically a parallel thing that we were doing. So they have to, and it doesn't matter if it was ours or wherever it was. These, organizations, community organizations. So they got to do the same thing that we had to do as a township, and as the applicants, they had to have their own lawyer or lawyers. They had to have their own experts, their own hydro G people that would speak on their behalf and argue their points. So
Yeah.
you couldn't say, "Oh, we'll just let the township." They could have just let us make the argument, but they wanted to make their own too, because you're never sure if the municipality is going to be as supportive as you want them to be.
Oh, it's interesting. So what do you estimate the township spent then on this endeavor?
I believe it was around $360,000.
It was close to the $400,000 mark, basically.
Yep.
Because it would have been, your lawyers, your experts.
Everything.
I think
Yep.
you mentioned on another time there was an appeal.
Yeah. So yeah, the
I'll get to
applicant.
that in a sec. I'll get to that in a sec.
Okay.
So
Yep.
so then obviously it's going to be an expensive proposition for this
Right.
homeowners association as well.
Well, most definitely. Yeah. Very much so. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Very-
that was one of the issues I think with the group when I was telling you my story about when I was campaigning and they were trying to raise money. So initially they were able to get, let's say, 100 or $200 from each home,
Right.
but after a while you've got to go back to the well, and that's
Yeah.
where the thing starts to fall apart.
Oh, most definitely. And that's the unfortunate thing is it's not for the faint of heart because you've got to be well heeled because everything is expensive. All of the experts are very expensive. So I don't know
Yeah,
what the homeowners spent, but I know what we spent and it was
yeah.
pricey.
So even if they spend a quarter of what you spend, it'd still be like $100,000.
Right.
It's always interesting to me when I was mayor and we were looking at some of these applications and trying to sort out or understand what the issues would be. And there was always this discussion about extracting gravel from below the water table.
Right. Almost definitely. Yeah.
So, and I always thought, okay, well, if that's an issue, I'm sure the Region of Waterloo or the
Grand
GRCA
River. Yeah.
would have some issue. And whenever oftentimes when they reviewed these applications, at times they would come back and say we have no concern.
Right.
So and then I'm looking at it going, okay, well, who's going to hire the expert then to deal with this when the region, for example, and their people and they're
Right.
responsible for ensuring the safety,
Yep.
integrity, protection of our groundwater supply,
Right.
because the aquifers, that's our source
Yeah.
for our drinking water. And if they're saying they're okay with it, that makes it a very difficult proposition. Then you
Right.
got to look for some other angle on these issues.
Right. Yeah. Definitely a tough one in it, but I do find that it's more. I just felt when I was going through the issue, going through the process, it seemed to be more of a local. The local issue was like at the lower tier level. Like it seemed like the upper tier wasn't overly engaged
Yeah.
even though that they were kind of, they were responsible to or GRCA.
Well, I think it's the concern about the costs. I mean, for a township
Sure.
like Wilmot, I mean, your annual budget is what at the time?
Woolwich.
Yeah, Woolwich,
Not
sorry.
Wilmot. Wilmot's a smaller one
Yeah,
next.
no. But
Our,
they're wealthier than you, I think. But anyway, go ahead.
I think our budget at the time, all in, like operation, capital, everything, was around 30 million.
Yeah, and so now here you're talking about something that's like
Mhm.
1%,
Yeah.
which is significant. I know
Yeah.
300,000,
Yeah.
400,000.
Right.
That's
But
a
you know
lot.
what? The way I look at it, and especially now that I'm not in politics, I think I felt we did the right thing because I think that's why you have locally elected, politicians that will spend the money where it needs to be spent to protect not the one company, but
Uh,
many in the community. And I think, we still are going to get gravel. It's not that they're short on gravel. It's just we're not getting it at the back.
Yeah, I don't think that's really the issue, but you raise an interesting point. It's like you've got a local council dealing with a local issue
Yep.
versus, let's say, one representative from the area having to convince somebody
Right.
in Cambridge to agree to fund a $300,000 to $400,000 legal case
Right.
for a gravel pit in Conestoga.
Right. And
Right,
as you
so-
know, the thing is, Robbie, is as you remember at GRCA, they didn't have too many budget lines for legal costs or legal fees.
Oh,
That
no,
was
they don't have anything.
they have nothing, and so they're there to help to enforce these things. But again,
Well, they're cash strapped. I mean,
Yep,
too, I mean, the
exactly.
province hadn't increased their budget line item for like 10 years in terms of the amount of money they were providing them.
Most
So
definitely.
it was, yeah, so it was very difficult because there was, I remember one particular case, it was a North Dumfries situation where the GRCA actually obtained a judgment against a property owner,
Yeah.
but the property owner ignored it and
I
continued to do
know.
what he was doing, and the GRCA couldn't enforce. Didn't know what to do
No
to
money.
enforce.
No money home.
Oh, so it was nothing, and
Right.
we at the township were in a similar situation.
And I don't think it's something that the townships or the municipalities really should have a budget line for. To
You
be
can't,
all the time. You can't do that. But
no, you
this
can't
was one of those
budget.
things, right?
It's rare
Yeah.
that you're gonna have a $300,000 to $400,000 legal bill
Right.
for a fight in a year. I mean, that's absolutely rare, okay?
Right.
And you just saw in the news recently where they settled the issue with Bombardier,
Right.
and it cost $180,000, which I was fine with that expenditure. But then you had a few people who suggested it was wrong or shouldn't have been spent or what have you.
Right.
But
Right.
that's how it goes. I mean, if you want, look at
Yep.
legal rights are great, but in order to enforce those legal rights, it takes
Right.
action in the courts, and to do that, you have to spend money.
Yep.
So
Yep.
as counselors and elected officials, we're sort of in the middle of all that to say, okay, is this money well spent or not well spent? So I mean, I give you credit for making that investment and taking that shot at
Yeah.
that issue, because that is substantial, and you
Well,
can't
yeah.
you can't have that budget item saying 300,000 to 400,000 all the
No.
time.
And I'm sure there was a number of residents that didn't live out in, Conestoga, in that area, that lived in different parts of the township, that thought it was just a waste of money, right? Like, what are you doing? You should be, I'm paying for this. But I did feel that we made the right decision.
Did
And
you hear from? Did you on that point? Did you hear from some people?
yes, I did. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. But and I think it's one of those things. It's like you think we're spending too much money on our volunteer firefighters till your house is on fire, and then we'll be
Well,
there. You know what I mean?
no,
Like,
no, 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 no. The analogy is police. Okay,
oh,
all
right.
due respect to police. That's the analogy.
Okay.
I've never heard anyone saying we're spending too much on volunteer firefighters. Okay, and I know you haven't either.
No, I know.
Actually, though, if anyone's listening to this, I was just chatting with our local volunteer fire department, and they're having a tough time finding recruits. So I don't know if there's anything you want to do in your local paper, in your rural post,
Sure.
on that issue. They're having a very difficult time finding recruits, and I know that was an issue. That's an issue recently in Wellesley, and probably no doubt in Wilmot and Woolwich as well. So
Right.
might be an interesting story to see if there's people interested in participating in their community.
I will make a note, Robbie. Yeah.
But let's talk about, okay, so you have this hearing, and you got to be sweating this one out a little bit until you get the decision. Right?
Yeah. But it's kind of neat because both our director of planning and our lawyers from Aaron Bearless, both of them were quite confident each day and said, we've got a good chance at this, a good shot at this, and they were pretty calm through the whole thing. And it was pretty hairy because the OMB at the time, LPAT now, they come to your township, basically take over your council chambers, and I think it was over a week every day, the hearings, right? And it is a little dicey, but yeah.
Yeah, because prior to me getting elected, I'd say maybe 10 years prior to that, or maybe a little longer, there was a gravel pit just outside of Ayr that opened up. And one of the things they did there was working with the developer or the proponent of the gravel pit, the company. They've got significant buffers in terms of land added to And I remember when I was a lawyer in town and I was doing the transfers for all of those things. Adding the pieces of land onto the backs of properties and then the buffer, and that seemed to resolve it. And that raises another question or concept is people, sometimes I say to them, look, if you're not happy about this gravel pit, and it depends on the situation, and if you don't have an angle like you had on the Huntsberger one, it's farther out in the country and it's only going to impact one or two places.
Exactly.
Is work with the proponent and try to, for example, enhance buffers. Because I'll tell you, on the one in Ayr that I was just talking about that was really, really close to the properties, but they got a buffer. I was doing real estate law back then too, and I can tell you, never once did the issue of the gravel pit ever come up as impacting house prices.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
wow.
Never once. It's always an argument people throw out there, but in that situation, which was directly homes that were in Ayr, gravel pit just outside of Ayr, never once impacted the pricing. Now, that pit is done now, and in fact, there's a large, this might even be more significant, I just thought of this. So now that's slated to be residential because, every gravel pit has to have a plan. And the owner of that property now just put forward a plan, and the density that they're proposing there has people really up in arms. So I'm thinking the reaction to this home plan is probably going to be greater than the reaction to the original gravel pit. So it's just funny that, what happens in people's perceptions.
I do know in Conestoga though, it definitely did. You saw the home prices were were quite. Well, after that ruling came out and the appeal was passed,
Yeah.
it almost doubled their home prices out there.
Really? Well, it'd be an interesting study for sure. I know sometimes when people are, let's say, the unknown
Right.
can cause some fear and
Right.
concern, and
Yep.
people say, "I'm out of here. I don't want a gravel pit in my
Right.
backyard."
Yep.
And that never happened in air at all. So it was a very interesting situation.
Right.
Now, okay, so you won that one. Congratulations to you. That was
Yep.
that was a good victory because you don't see those things
Right.
too often.
Right.
And the reason we're talking about gravel pits is because Wilmot's going through this
Yes, they are.
situation,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
it was I saw it in the paper. There's looks like a very active community base, grassroots base
Right.
that wants to
Right.
do something about it. And they have some members on council who I'd say would be probably progressive in terms of wanting to assist the community.
Mhm.
That grassroots group.
Right.
And so that's what made me think of your situation. And
Mhm.
so if you had any advice, and we'll talk about Westmont Rose in a second, but if you had any advice to people that
Right.
were looking at this situation based on your experience, what would you say?
My
to them?
biggest advice, if there's an election, talk to the people who are running and say, where are you committing? And hopefully they will follow through in their commitment. But I think the biggest thing that had Conestoga with the Hunsberger pit, I feel that it was the council that was supportive of doing the right thing, which was helping fight that gravel pit. I think that's what gave us the biggest thing, because you know what? I think that when you come to like the township, with especially Dan Kennelly at the time, our director of planning, who had the experience, that
Yes.
helped out too. But I think the biggest thing is if you can get council on side, it does. At the time, it made a huge difference for.
There has to be a reason for them to be on site.
Most
You're not just going to
definitely.
take a flyer on any gravel pit.
I agree. No, I agree.
Okay.
There's got to be a good reason. But
Yeah.
if you have it's kind of like you look at safe injection sites or casinos or any of these things. You can't have them near the school. You can't.
We already talked about
Right?
casinos, so
But,
we're not.
no. But it's the same thing with the gravel pits. I think gravel pits have a place, but just not directly in somebody's backyard.
Right, and that's the point, okay?
Right,
It's not just solely getting a council that's going to say, yeah, we're going to fight this. You've got to
You got to have a
convince.
good reason. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
well, that's the key.
I
And
think
then,
that's the thing.
taking that reason though, but once they've taken that reason and then committing the financial resources. So that I'll give you credit for is, your planner thought you had it. Like if your
Right.
planner said, this is no way this thing's being stopped at OMB.
Right. Yeah.
You're going to be second guessing that commitment you made during the election.
Most definitely. Yeah.
So there are a lot of conditions that fell into place here. So
Right.
so I agree, having a council, but in order to have a council that's committed, you have to show them the reason why
Right.
this could be successful.
And you got to have a good story, and it can't just be motivated by not in my backyard. Like there's also there's an application in Woolwich in Maryhill right now. And, Doug Ford last August, talking about the Campbellford pit, said, well, if people don't want it in their backyard, they shouldn't have it in their backyard. And
Yeah. I think that's reactive. Until you see legislation, it's like what they say about other politicians. Don't go by what they say, go by what they do.
But I think, these impassioned arguments, you got to have some meat on the bone. That's the thing. You've got to have some good reason. Yeah. And I think that's the big thing. It has to be kind of the facts. Let's look at the facts and why you think this gravel pit shouldn't be here. I think it's maybe an easier argument in Woolwich than it would be in North Dumfries, because North Dumfries is the gravel.
Well, no, you know what? It might have been an argument in North Dumfries too, but the people who owned homes in that area were fine with the deal. So all I'm saying is, you can either take the time to maybe meet and see if you can work out a resolution.
Yeah.
Or fight it, because once you take it, see, by coming to a resolution, the decision is still in your hands.
Right. Exactly.
Okay? You're coming to an agreement with the other party.
So. Yep.
Once it goes to OMB, the decision's out of your hands.
Yeah.
And so, for example, let's take the Huntsberger one. If you had lost that,
right,
then that pit would go right up to the backyard.
Pretty much, yeah.
Alternative is negotiating a 50-yard buffer.
Right.
So now
But
you got to say, what's the bird in the hand versus two in the bush? So it's a lot of risk for everybody, for
there
sure.
it is. Yep. And I
Yeah.
even remember before maybe even after the election in 2010, I met with Bob Huntsberger and his son and said, "Hey, Bob, like, why do you want a gravel pit?" Well, because we have gravel there, and some of the studies that I had seen, it wasn't great gravel, like it wasn't a quality. And I said, "Why do you
Sure.
look at doing? Why not a subdivision? Or because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
right
yeah, yeah.
there and it would make more sense." But
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
I mean, it's a difficult one because look at God love the farmers. They feed the cities and
yeah,
everything else. And so I have sometimes a hard time, telling them what to do with their land because basically they're not making huge revenue
no,
income all their life. Their retirement is their land.
right, right.
And, farm prices on the acreages have gone up considerably.
Hmm.
Gravel pit acreage is even much more.
Most definitely, yeah.
Well, we won't, I know you're not criticizing. We're not criticizing someone
No,
for taking a look at it. I think
no,
they should
definitely not.
their land. They should, give that consideration. And at the end of the day, an OMB hearing, which was fairly held, heard the arguments from three
Yep.
sides in this case, and
Yes,
came to a conclusion that the pit would not go ahead. Is that correct?
that is correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah. And then they tried to appeal it and were unsuccessful at the appeal.
Right. That is correct. Yep.
Yeah. So that's a good story about how there was a win in this local area.
Hmm.
Again, like all litigation, there's that risk. Do you leave the decision making in your own
Hmm.
hands, so
Yeah.
that's mediation, or do you or negotiation, or do you just say no, I'm going to the OMB?
Right.
So in that case, you guys had some good information in order to
Yeah.
make the decision, and it was successful. Now the the Kissing Bridge. Oh, before we get into that, let's just touch on gravel revenues for a second. I always found this to be an interesting
Yeah. Yeah.
story too. So while we were there, I don't know what you're getting, what they get now, but it was like 11 cents per metric ton.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
TONE.
Yes.
Um, and so 11 cents. And in our situation here in the region, because we're two-tier, I think 5 cents went to the region because the whole point of and 6 cents went to the township, and the whole
Right.
point of that amount of money was for road construction because the
Right.
trucks were going
Yep.
on the road, and you got to repair
Right.
the road. So that's really what the main purpose of the of the
Hmm.
of the fee or the levy or whatever what do we
Right.
call it? The 11 cents. So out of that, so 6 cents metric ton,
Right.
6 cents,
Right. Right.
and we get a check every year.
Right.
The check every year was
Hmm.
like around $300,000.
Yeah. Considerably less than Woolwich, but yes, because I
But
know
that's a
North
lot
Dumfries.
of 6 cents, to make 300,000.
It is.
Imagine how
It
much
is.
gravel is, and that's
That's
just,
huge. Yeah. Yeah.
and that was North Dumfries. We were like in the top 10.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
of gravel producing municipalities in Ontario. In fact, there was a group called TAPMO, the Aggregate Producing Municipalities of Ontario,
Okay.
and which I think Sue Foxton is the chair of now.
Okay.
So this group was formed to try to see if we could raise the levies, and they may have.
I
I
think
know
they
they're,
did. I think they did go back and raise
yeah.
those
But
levies.
one of the issues, because you think, well, why wouldn't they just raise it? What gravel pits do is
Right.
just a line item. They just pass it on to the consumer. You know who
Exactly.
the biggest consumer of gravel is? The province. The province was buying over 50% of the gravel. So they were a little hard pressed
Okay.
to raise the pricing because it was just basically
Exactly.
raising the prices on themselves.
Right. Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that aside, now we got Westmont Roads. We got like the covered bridge, the longest covered
Exactly.
bridge in what, Canada, the
Ontario.
world?
No, and it's the last one in Ontario. I think there's
Okay.
still one out in the East Coast somewhere, but we have the nicest one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have the nicest.
Do you make a wish and it comes true by the time you walk out of there?
Yes, you actually do. Yeah. So we went on the bridge and wished that the gravel pit would go away, and it did.
And it did.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there was a gravel pit proposal
Yes.
around that, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Capital Paving had, they were going to develop a number of acres around there. It's right at the end of the covered bridge.
It was a farm property.
Yep. Yep.
And was this proposal in existence prior to the election of
Yes.
2010?
Yeah. It was already in the works also. Yeah.
Okay. So now, again, did that result in a meeting with a local organization?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. So you may or may not remember at the time the Bridge Keepers Association, which
Yeah, I
was,
do remember.
they
Yeah.
were very well organized.
Very, very well organized. Yes.
Very well organized. The people out in Westmount Rose kind of all, got together. They had a logo, they had a campaign. It was the Bridge Keepers because, and Tony Dowling, Tony, who
Yeah.
lives right at the end of the bridge. And he lived in the Bridge Keepers house from way back in
Okay.
early century.
Yeah.
And they were very well funded, very well committed. Like they had a commitment from most of the residents in Westmount Rose. So they were ready for battle. They did fundraising every year. They had, barbecues and you name it. And so they were already up and running. So I met with
It's
them.
interesting though, because you're talking about all these events. So this is like stretching out over years.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Because a gravel pit application could go on a decade.
Yeah.
So
It's usually a timeline that a township has to, or a municipality has to
right,
respond to an application, a
right,
planning application.
yeah,
But oftentimes those timeframes aren't upheld. I mean, people are
right,
fine to just continue along and keep
right, right,
working.
right, right.
So, okay. So what was your commitment to this group?
Well, it was the same thing as they did in Conestoga.
Yes.
Is I thought personally, without really a lot of background knowledge on plannings and official plans, and it was just one of those things where I thought, you don't have a gravel pit beside our last, historic, like the region took over the Westmount Rose Kissing Bridge itself, of the upkeep and maintenance of it, because it's a historical landmark.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was and still is a gravel pit in Westmount Rose right next to it, but it's a small sittler pit that's been there since, I think,
Oh,
World
it's sort
War
of like
II.
a farm over, so to speak.
Well, it's kind of it's right on the road around the gravel pit, but it had really not been in high production, so they take out one truckload
Yeah.
out a year and
Yeah,
keep it
yeah, yeah.
alive. But it's
Those
just
are
a small.
the old licenses that were grandfathered. They never had an
Exactly.
end date. Now they usually have an end date, and you got to have a
Yes.
plan for
Plan
remediation.
for exactly.
There's a bunch that have like no
Yeah.
plan for remediation was
Oh,
required, and they got
yeah.
grandfathered.
So this one, it was an easy, and it was the same thing that when I met with them, it was the same thing as I said, I'm committed to help, stop this pit from continuing on because this is not
Yeah.
the space.
I got to ask you now, as here you are, you're campaigning as a politician, and
Yeah.
you've met with two gravel groups. In the
Right.
back of your mind, were you thinking one commitment was going to be easier than the other commitment?
I figured that I actually figured that the Westmount Rose would have been easier because it's the Kissing Bridge. It's a historic. Everyone knows about the
Yeah.
Kissing Bridge,
Yeah.
and it's pretty easy to talk to somebody that really doesn't have an opinion and say, hey, should we have a gravel pit at the end of? Of course not, right? Where the Conestoga one seemed to be a bit of a long shot at the
Yeah.
time before I really got into it, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can appreciate because when you're campaigning, you don't have all the background information. So
You don't have staff to brief
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
You just know, look at, you're telling me a gravel pit's coming up to your backyard. Yeah, no, that doesn't sound right. And so we'll see.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, exactly. So,
Okay, so now tell me, because eventually this pit did get stopped, the Westmont
oh
Rose.
yes, yeah. So interestingly enough, when so while we were doing the OMB hearing,
On the other one.
the other one with the Hunsberger 100 developments, we had Airden Bearless. They were in our office every day, and I was an early riser, and I was at the office at 7:30. And so I was talking to the lawyers from Airden Bearless and said, listen, since you're here and, your hourly rate is pretty
Yeah.
high.
Yeah.
You haven't started yet. So let's, and I explained the situation to them. I said, I just need some, kind of what
You
your
want their thoughts? You want their thoughts on this other one?
Yeah. And so they basically gave me some direction, and they said, they had a quick look at it and said, we could probably ask a few things from the group from Capital Paving,
Like some
and
additional studies or something?
yeah, which is fully within the realm of the township scope. But see, not only Capital Paving, but other gravel pit companies were watching this OMB hearing of Hunsberger because it could be pivotal on the rest. And so I don't know if it was their focus or whatever, but we'd asked for a few things from them and they hadn't responded. So,
Hold on, though. Okay, hold on. You
okay,
asked for some additional studies.
right.
There was a time component to this, wasn't there?
Yes. Yep. Oh, yeah. We gave them a time frame and we said we need to
But,
have
but the time frame is not something you just make up arbitrarily.
No, it was kind of a guideline from the planning side
Yeah.
of things is we need this by this date and we didn't get it by that date.
Hold on, how long a period of time was it approximately?
I don't remember, but it was pretty short. It was maybe, it could have been a month or something, but it wasn't
Okay.
long. So then,
The township is saying, okay, you sent out a request for some additional documents with a specific deadline.
we need to know by this date.
Yeah.
Right. Didn't get anything. So I remember signing that letter going back to the applicant to say that, your application has now been closed because we haven't heard from you. And
So even though this thing was around for a period of time, like we're
yeah,
talking
years. Yeah.
based on this request, as you're entitled to do by the rules and regulations,
Right.
you had a specific timeline. They didn't
Right.
respond within that timeline. So the township then was entitled to or able to
Right.
close the
Close
application.
the application. So for them to come back, Capital Paving came back and basically they had to reapply. So they had to they had to apply again. And then the clock got reset to zero and they had to start
So
from
we had to
square
start
one.
over again.
Everything. So they had to have all new studies, all new experts, you name it. All the public hearings had to start all over again. And they just abandoned the application and
What,
didn't.
no appeal or attempt to
No.
appeal?
No, no one to appeal to, really, because it hadn't got to that stage. So they just kind of looked elsewhere.
No, it's
So,
interesting. This reminds me, and someday I'll just do a show myself where I'll talk about the grocery store
yes.
story, right? It's a classic.
Yeah.
But
Anyway,
after the township had made their decision on
right.
property where a grocery store was going to go,
Mhm.
the competing land owner or the competing proposal, the
Right.
proponent, wanted to appeal our decision to the
Right.
OMB. And so they had a specific time frame. It was like, I don't know, 30 days or something like that. And so on the 30th day, the township received a notice of appeal.
Right.
But the appeal is to the township and the region because of the two-tier. This is one time where two-tier really worked out because by filing it or serving it on the township, that's
Right.
the service. They
Right.
realized the next day that they had to serve the region.
Right. And they were out of time.
One day, their appeal failed and we were able
Right.
to proceed with the other applications.
Right. Yeah.
So technical. I thought for sure, one day they would.
No.
They tried to get that overturned, but the OMB said
Right.
no, it's the deadline. So
Yep.
it's very rigid, the deadline.
Most definitely. Yep.
So
Anyway.
you're like 2-0 on gravel pits.
That was a good one, yeah. That was especially the Westmount Rose one because it didn't really cost us anything because I got some advice from our high-priced lawyers and it cost the cost of a stamp.
So Todd, we're gonna end this thing, but I'm just gonna say
Yeah.
one went out with a bang and the other went out with a whimper.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
that's good stuff. Those are good stories.
Yeah.
Listen, I want to wish you, continued success.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Newspaper, the Real Post.
Yeah.
I get it. I enjoy it. I'm out in air. I get it. And I think it's since post-COVID, the quality is looking really good. So
Great, thank you. We're working hard on it every day.
Okay, listen, we'll be back in touch again sometime. You take care.
All right. Thanks again, Rob.
Okay, so thank you again for listening to another edition of the Old Gray Mayors. My name is Rob Deutschman. I want to thank my friend Alex Kinsella for putting it all together and making the magic happen. And you, the listener, for taking the time to listen. And again, if you have any issue or topic or person that you think would be an interesting interview, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to make it all happen.